The message arrived at the Varath Council chamber on a quiet morning, carried by a courier drone with a human diplomatic seal. It was the fourth such message in 2 years. High Speaker Goru accepted it without urgency. He set it on the long desk beside the other 3, all still sealed, all still unread. His aide opened it for him. Goru listened as the words were read aloud. The message was from Ambassador Lyra Odin, the human representative stationed at the border post near the Kale Line. The Kale Line was a boundary drawn 6 years ago by mutual agreement between the Varath Dominion and the human governments. It ran along the edge of a sparse region of space, mostly empty systems with a few mineral-rich moons. The humans had not settled there. The Varath had not either. The line simply existed, agreed upon, signed, recorded. The message said the same thing the last 3 had said, only with more detail this time. If Varath vessels crossed the Kale Line for the purpose of colonization or military positioning, the human governments would treat it as a formal act of aggression. There would be no further diplomatic discussion after that point. The response would be military. Goru set the translated copy down. Commander Braille was already standing at the side of the room. He had been invited to this reading because the message contained military language. He was the senior field commander of the Varath Western Forces, and he had spent 30 years in that role. He was not a man who worried easily. Goru looked at him. "Your reading of this." Braille picked up the message, scanned it briefly, and set it back down. The same as before. Humans do not fight unless forced into a corner. They negotiate, they delay, they issue formal complaints through proper channels. He gestured at the 4 messages on the desk. That is what these are, proper complaints. They mention a military response. They always mention a military response. Braille clasped his hands behind his back. I have studied their conflict record carefully. In the last 40 years, humans have initiated direct military action exactly twice. Both times they were already being fired upon. They are cautious. They value their population. They do not spend lives on territory disputes when they have diplomats. Counselor Des, seated at the far end of the table, looked up from her own copy. She was younger than Goru by 2 decades, and she had a habit of reading things more than once before speaking. The language in this one is different from the previous 3, she said. The previous messages offered continued negotiation. This one does not. It only states the consequence. Braille glanced at her. A rhetorical shift. They are trying to apply pressure. Des looked at the message again. She did not respond to Braille. Goru trusted Braille. The commander had never been wrong about military matters before. The Varath had tested human patience on smaller things over the years. A survey vessel here, a patrol extension there, and nothing had come of it. The humans complained, the Varath withdrew, and the cycle repeated. It was a slow, careful way of finding the edges of a boundary. The Kale Line territory has 3 moons with confirmed mineral deposits, Goru said. Our extraction teams are ready. They have been ready for 8 months, Braille confirmed. The colonization fleet is assembled, 40 vessels, support ships, surveying craft, 2 light escort warships. And if the humans respond? Braille smiled slightly. They will send Ambassador Odin. She will request an emergency session. We will enter another round of talks. The extraction will be underway by then, and possession, in practice, changes the terms of any negotiation. Goru considered this. It was not the first time a Dominion Council had moved forward by creating facts on the ground. It was how territory had always worked, across every species he had ever studied. You extended, you established, and then you negotiated from strength. He approved the crossing. The order went to the colonization fleet that same afternoon. At the border post near the Kale Line, Ambassador Odin received the automated sensor alert from the station AI called Warden. Warden tracked all vessel movement in the boundary zone. The alert showed 40 Varath vessels in coordinated formation crossing the line at the 3rd transit corridor. Odin read the alert once. She had written 4 warnings. She had spent 2 years at this post specifically because her government wanted someone patient and precise in this role. She was both of those things. She did not send a 5th message to the Varath Council. Instead, she opened a channel to the Human Military Command post 16 light minutes away, flagged priority, and sent a single short transmission. It contained the sensor data from Warden, the timestamp of the crossing, and a reference code that any officer in Human Command would recognize. The reference code pointed to a contingency plan called Operation Quiet Push. It had been prepared 11 years ago. It had been updated 4 times since then. The most recent update had been 3 months ago. She then composed a short personal note to Admiral Ren Voss, the man who had built Quiet Push from the beginning. The note said only, "They crossed. It is yours now." Warden logged the crossing, timestamped it, and opened a new operational file. At the Human Command post, Admiral Voss received the transmission. He read it at his desk, in a room that was quiet and cold and lit by pale blue screens. He did not raise his voice. He did not call an emergency meeting. He looked at the sensor data for a long moment, then looked at the reference code. Then he gave the order to activate. He had rehearsed the order so many times over 11 years that it came out flat and calm. The machinery of Quiet Push began to move. The Varath colonization fleet moved through the Kale Line territory at a slow and deliberate pace. 40 vessels in a wide formation, no weapons armed, no shields raised. Commander Braille had insisted on that. He wanted the crossing to look like what it was, a civilian operation with minimal escort. Nothing that could be called provocation. Everything that could be called settlement. He monitored from his command ship, a mid-size warship attached to the fleet as an escort. The sensors showed clean space in every direction. No human vessels in range. No signal traffic from the border post since the crossing. He sent a report to High Speaker Goro. No response from human military. Fleet proceeding on schedule. He included the phrase situation nominal, which he had used in reports for 30 years and which he found reassuring to write. Counselor Des read a copy of the same report in her office on the council station. She had requested access to the live feed from Braille's ship after the crossing was approved. Goro had allowed it without asking why. Des had a different concern than Goro. She had spent the past 3 days reading the full Human Conflict Archive, not the summary version Braille referenced in council, but the actual documents. Battle records, after-action reports, strategic assessments prepared by Human Command and later obtained through intelligence channels. What she found was not a picture of a cautious species. It was a picture of a patient one. There was a difference. A cautious species avoided confrontation because it feared the cost. A patient species prepared for confrontation quietly, at length, and then waited for the right moment to make the cost someone else's problem. Every major engagement in the human record followed the same basic shape: slow preparation, extended positioning, and then a response that was faster and more complete than the other side had calculated. The humans did not bluff. They did not posture. They simply built something in advance and then used it. Des sent a message to Braille asking him one question. She asked whether he had read the full archive or the strategic summary. Braille replied within the hour. He said the summary was sufficient and thorough. Des looked at the reply for a while. Then she set it aside and continued reading. 12 light hours from the colonization fleet. In a region of space the Varath sensors did not regularly sweep. Captain Holt's ship came out of blackout running. Blackout running was not a stealth technology in the traditional sense. It did not bend light or scramble signals. It simply meant every non-essential system was powered down to the minimum needed for life support and navigation. No active sensor pings. No communication traffic. No engine signatures above the background radiation level of the region. A ship in blackout running was not invisible. It was simply very easy to miss if you were not looking for it specifically, and looking for it required knowing where to look. Holt's vessel was one of 42. They had been in position for 6 days. Operation Quiet Push had a simple architecture at its core. The humans had identified, 11 years ago, every likely route a Verath expansion fleet would use to enter Kale Line territory. There were 4 primary corridors and 2 secondary ones. Each corridor had been studied, mapped, and quietly seeded over the following years with relay stations, supply caches, and positioning markers. The supply caches had been placed by automated vessels under cover of routine mineral survey missions. The markers were passive and produced no signal. When the activation order came from Voss, the 42 ships already in position simply began moving to their assigned coordinates. No rush, no dramatic acceleration. They drifted into place over the course of 4 days, following pre-calculated drift routes that kept their thermal output below the detection threshold of Verath long-range sensors. Holt ran the positioning checks herself. She was not a woman who delegated the details she could personally verify. Every ship reported in. Every coordinate was confirmed. The formation was not a battle line. It was not a defensive wall. It was a net, and the Verath colonization fleet was already inside it. She filed a status report to Voss. Positioning complete. Quiet push formation holding. Awaiting your call. Voss replied with 2 words, stand by. That was all. On the Verath command ship, Braille reviewed the latest sensor sweep. Empty space in all directions. No human military presence. The colonization fleet had reached the first target moon and survey teams were already on the surface. He updated his report to Goro. Mining operations beginning ahead of schedule. No human response of any kind. Situation nominal. He set the report aside, leaned back, and allowed himself a small satisfaction. He had been right. He had studied the humans correctly. They would send Odin eventually, there would be talks, and by the time those talks concluded, the Verath would have established extraction infrastructure on 3 moons. It was all going exactly as planned. He did not notice that his long-range sensors had not detected anything unusual, because there was nothing unusual to detect. He had no way to know that the absence of a signal was itself the signal. Holt watched the Verath fleet on her passive sensors. She noted the mining teams on the moon's surface. She noted the 2 escort warships holding position near the colonization cluster. She made a small annotation in her operational log. Then she waited. Patience was not something she had learned from a manual. It was something 11 years of preparation had built into her without her noticing. Braille sent the demand on the 8th day. He had discussed it with no one. In his view, it was a practical step. The colonization fleet had established a working camp on the first moon. Survey teams were active on the second. The humans had not responded to the crossing in any meaningful way. Now was the time to formalize the Verath claim before talks began on human terms. He composed the message himself and addressed it to Ambassador Odin at the border post. The message stated that the Verath Dominion had established a lawful presence in the Kale Line territory under the principle of active use, which in Verath law superseded prior boundary agreements when one party had left territory unclaimed. It requested that the human government acknowledge the Verath claim formally and begin revised boundary negotiations within 30 days. He marked it high priority and sent it. Odin received it within minutes. She read it once, then she wrote a reply of 8 words. You were warned, you chose not to listen. She sent it and then sat still for a moment. She had been patient for 2 years. She had written 4 detailed warnings. She had done everything that was asked of her in this role. What came next was no longer her part of this. She sent a brief message to Voss. Demand received, reply sent, your call, Admiral. Voss received both messages at the same time. He looked at the live position feed from Holt for a moment. Then he contacted Holt directly. One word: go. The Varath colonization fleet was clustered near the first moon when the human ships appeared. They did not come from one direction. They did not drop out of faster-than-light travel with the flash and turbulence that most species used. They simply became visible, one by one, on Varath sensors across every angle. Ships that had been running below detection threshold for 6 days raised their power levels to standard operating status, and suddenly the Varath sensors were reading 42 contacts where before there had been nothing. The Varath sensor officer reported the contacts in a voice that was carefully controlled, then reported them again because the count seemed wrong the first time. Braille came to the bridge. The display showed the contacts arranged in a complete ring around the fleet, not a loose perimeter, a tight, precise formation with overlapping coverage at every gap. The nearest human ship was 11,000 kilometers away. The farthest was 44,000. The geometry was not aggressive. It was complete. Braille stared at the display for a long time without speaking. His sensor officer pointed out that the human ships were not charging weapons, not accelerating toward the fleet, not broadcasting any signal. They were simply present. That was somehow worse than anything Braille had prepared for. He ordered his 2 escort warships to move to the front of the formation and signal readiness. He wanted to see if the human ring would react. Holt watched the 2 Varath warships move on her feed. She noted the direction, the speed, the positioning. She sent a quiet update to all 42 ships, tightened by 15%. She did not explain why. The human formation contracted slightly, smoothly, without urgency. The Varath warships stopped moving. Braille ordered a communication channel open to the nearest human vessel. No response. He tried a broad channel to the entire formation. Nothing. He sent a text message. No acknowledgement. The human ships held their positions and said nothing. Braille had never encountered silence used this way. In every tense situation he had managed before, the other party communicated. They made demands, stated positions, issued warnings. Silence was something you used before talks began, not after you had surrounded someone. He did not know what to do with an opponent who had already done everything and was now simply waiting. He sent a message to Guru. The tone was different from all the previous ones. He said, "There are 42 human warships surrounding the fleet. They are not communicating. I am requesting guidance." He did not use the phrase situation nominal. Guru received the message in council with Counselor Des present. Des read it first. When she looked up, her expression was not one of surprise. Guru asked what she thought. She said they should contact Ambassador Odin immediately and ask what the human terms were going to be. Guru asked why she was so certain there would be terms rather than an attack. Des said because if the humans wanted to destroy the fleet, they would have done it 6 days ago, before anyone knew they were there. Guru sat with that for a moment. Then he told his aide to open a channel to Odin. Odin received the request and let it sit for 40 minutes before accepting it, not out of cruelty. She had a report to finish for Voss first. When she accepted the channel, Guru was already at the screen. He looked older than he had the last time she had seen him. She introduced herself. He introduced himself. There was a pause. Then Guru asked what the humans wanted. Odin folded her hands on the desk in front of her and began to speak. Odin gave Guru the list without preamble. Full withdrawal of all Varath vessels from Kale Line territory within 72 hours. Return of any extracted resources or payment equivalent to their assessed value. A formal written acknowledgement from the Varath Council that the 4 warnings had been received, understood, and deliberately ignored. And a new boundary treaty to be negotiated entirely on human terms, with human-drafted language. Guru listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said the council would need time to consider. Odin said they had 72 hours. The clock had already started. She closed the channel. Guru turned to Des. He asked her what she thought the chances were that the council would agree. Des said she thought the harder question was what happened if they did not. Braille had been trying to reach human command directly for 6 hours, not through Odin, through the military channel addressed to whoever was commanding the ships around them. He identified himself by rank and name. He explained that he was requesting a military-to-military conversation to discuss the current situation professionally. He said he believed there was room for a practical resolution that did not require council involvement. No response came. He changed approach. He sent a message stating that the Varath escort warships were prepared to withdraw from the formation if the human fleet would open a corridor for them to do so, a gesture of good faith. He framed it as de-escalation. No response. He sent a third message, explaining that the colonization fleet vessels were civilian ships with civilian crew, and that maintaining the encirclement was placing those civilians under undue stress. No response. He walked back to his personal quarters and sat down. He had been in his command role for 30 years. He had navigated difficult situations, border tensions, resource disputes, a full military engagement 20 years ago against a different species that had been resolved in the Varath's favor. He had always been able to identify his opponent's pressure points and find the path through. He could not find the path here because the humans were not applying pressure. They were simply present. They were not trying to intimidate him or break his resolve. They did not seem to need anything from him at all. He pulled up the full human conflict archive on his personal terminal, the one Des had asked him about. He had told her he read it. That had been a partial truth. He had read the summary, which was 300 pages, and had concluded that it was thorough. The full archive was 11,000 pages. He started reading. 2 hours in, he found the section on human strategic doctrine that the summary had condensed into 4 paragraphs. The full version was 900 pages and contained something the summary had not included, a concept the humans called a permanent record of intent. When humans issued a formal warning and the other party ignored it, the humans recorded it, not as a diplomatic note, as a classified operational file. Every subsequent action the other party took was logged against that file. The ignored warning was treated, legally and militarily, as evidence that the other party had accepted the possibility of a military response and had chosen to proceed anyway. This shifted the moral and legal burden of any conflict entirely onto the party that had crossed the line. The humans did not get angry when warnings were ignored. They got prepared, and they kept the paperwork. Braille sat back. He thought about the 4 sealed messages on Guru's desk. He thought about Des asking him whether he had read the full archive. He understood now why she had asked. The second Varath force arrived at the transit corridor 2 days after the encirclement. Guru had ordered it before Odin's call. It was a war fleet, not an escort. 12 combat vessels, larger than anything Braille had with the colonization fleet. Guru had hoped their arrival would change the negotiating position, a show of force at the approach route while Braille negotiated from inside. It was a classic 2-point pressure strategy. The warfleet dropped out of transit and immediately went to battle stations. Their sensors showed the transit corridor was blocked, not by ships, by a network of small devices, each one the size of a cargo crate, positioned across the corridor in a pattern so dense that navigating through it at any meaningful speed was impossible. Moving slowly was possible, but would take 11 hours and leave every ship in the fleet exposed for the entire passage. At the far end of the corridor, barely at sensor range, a line of human ships held position, engines off, weapons cold, waiting. The Varath fleet commander sent a challenge signal. No response. He asked his navigator how long it would take to go around the corridor through open space. The navigator said 4 days minimum, and when they came out on the other side, the human ships would have had 4 days to reposition. The commander sent an emergency message to Goro. Goro received 2 messages at the same time, one from the corridor fleet saying they were blocked, one from Braille saying the same thing he had been saying for 2 days. No response from human command, encirclement holding, please advise. Goro looked at both messages for a very long time. Then he asked Des to be in his office in 10 minutes. Des arrived in 8. She sat down across from him. She did not say "I told you so" because she was not that kind of person, and also because there was no time for it. Goro asked her what they should do. She said she thought it was time to talk to Odin again, and this time to listen more carefully. The 72-hour deadline passed without a full council agreement. Goro had presented the human terms to the council. 3 members had refused immediately. 2 others had asked for more time to consider. One had suggested sending another warfleet to support the one already blocked at the corridor. Goro had not approved the 3rd fleet. He had instead called an emergency closed session with only the senior council members and Commander Braille present. Braille arrived looking different from how he had looked a week ago. The confidence was still on his face, but it was sitting stiffly, like a mask worn past the point of comfort. He gave his operational report. The encirclement was unchanged. Human ships were maintaining position. The colonization fleet was running low on fresh supplies because the automated resupply route from Verath space ran through the corridor now blocked by the human device network. He estimated they had 11 days before the colonization crew's food situation became a genuine problem. One council member said that proved the humans were using siege tactics and that the Dominion should respond with force. Braille said nothing to that. Des said quietly that responding with force required being able to get force to the location, which the corridor situation was preventing. The council member said they should go around. Des said that by the time any relief fleet went around through open space, the colonization crew would already be in distress, and the human ships that were currently sitting at the far end of the corridor would be repositioned and waiting. Another silence fell over the room. Goro looked at Braille. You said the humans would not respond militarily unless they were already being fired upon. They did not wait to be fired upon. Braille said carefully that technically no weapons had been fired. Goro said that was a very narrow interpretation of what was happening. Braille did not disagree. Goro made the call himself. He did not ask Braille to handle it. He did not send Des as a representative. He opened a direct channel to Ambassador Odin's station, and when the connection was accepted, he appeared on screen himself. Odin looked at him for a moment. She seemed unsurprised. High Speaker. Ambassador. He sat straight. He had been a politician for 40 years. He had made hard calls before, but he found that the specific combination of circumstances he was in now, having ignored 4 warnings, having watched his 2nd fleet stopped cold without a single human weapon firing, having an 11-day clock running on his colonization crew's food supply, removed most of the political language he usually relied on. He said, "We underestimated you." Odin said nothing. She waited. Goro said, "We believed the warnings were a negotiating position. We believed your species preferred diplomacy over conflict and that crossing the line would lead to talks, not to this." He paused. "We were wrong." Odin said, "Yes." Goro said, "I would like to discuss the terms again." Odin said she was listening. He said the council could agree to full withdrawal of the colonization fleet. He said the resources extracted so far were minimal, 3 days of preliminary survey work, and payment could be arranged. He said the formal acknowledgement was more difficult politically, because it required the council to state publicly that it had ignored human warnings, and that would have consequences inside Verath political structure. Odin said the acknowledgement was not optional. Goro said he understood that. He was explaining the difficulty, not refusing. Odin said she could allow the formal acknowledgement to be filed with the Boundary Treaty record rather than issued as a public statement, if the full text remained accessible to both governments. She said this was a one-time adjustment, and the rest of the terms were unchanged. Goro said he would take that to the council. He looked at her for a moment before ending the channel. He asked her one question that was not part of the negotiation. He asked how long the human fleet had been positioned before the colonization fleet arrived. Odin said 6 days after the crossing. But the preparations had been in place for years. Goro nodded slowly. He ended the channel. Inside the council session that followed, Braille was removed from his command role by a formal council vote. It was not done with anger. It was done with the specific procedural quietness that Varath councils used when they needed to assign responsibility without creating a political crisis. He sat in the chamber for the duration of the vote. He did not argue. He had read enough of the archive to understand that argument was not going to change the outcome of anything. After the vote, Des walked past him in the corridor outside. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He had already told himself everything she might have said in his quarters, alone, over the last 3 nights, reading 11,000 pages that he should have read before any of this began. The council voted on the terms that same evening. The vote was not unanimous. It was close, but it passed. Garo sent the agreement to Odin. Odin read it, confirmed receipt, and forwarded it to Voss. Voss read it at his desk. He filed it in the operational record. Then he sent Holt the order to open a withdrawal corridor for the colonization fleet and stand by to escort. 2 words at the end of the message that had not been in the original plan, but that Voss had added himself. Be kind. Holt read those 2 words. She understood what he meant. She opened the corridor. The colonization fleet left in single file. Holt's ship flew alongside them. Not behind, not above, not in a position that could be read as threatening. Directly alongside, matching speed, close enough that the Varath crew could see the dark gray hull through their viewports if they looked. It was the position you took when you were accompanying someone, not escorting a prisoner. She had done this deliberately. Voss had said be kind. She had thought about what that meant for 2 hours before the corridor opened. Then she had positioned her ship and kept her weapons cold and her communication channels open but quiet. None of the Varath colonization ships tried to contact her. She did not contact them. They traveled in that formation for 19 hours, from the first moon all the way back to the Kale line. When the lead Varath ship crossed back over the boundary, Warden logged the timestamp automatically. Holt noted it in her log as well. Then she brought her ship to a full stop at the line and held position as the remaining Varath vessels crossed one by one. The last ship to cross was a small survey craft, the kind with a crew of 6, used for surface sampling. It was moving slowly and its engine output was slightly irregular, a minor mechanical issue that had probably gone unattended during the encirclement. Holt watched it cross the line. When it was fully over, she released a short automated signal in the standard format. Crossing confirmed. File closed. Then she turned her ship around and went home. The Boundary Treaty was signed at Warden Station, the same post where Odin had sent her 8-word reply. The location was Odin's suggestion. She had offered it to Goru's team without explanation, and they had accepted without asking for one. Goro came in person. He brought Des and 2 other council members. He did not bring any military personnel. Odin had Voss attend by live channel, his image displayed on a screen in the corner of the room. He watched without speaking throughout the proceedings. When the treaty was signed and the formal acknowledgement was filed in the record, Voss simply nodded at the screen and ended his connection. The treaty itself was written in plain language. Des had read the draft 3 times before the signing and had found it notable for what it did not contain. It had no penalties for future violations written as vague diplomatic language. It stated precisely what would happen if the Kale line was crossed again without prior agreement. It named the specific human units that would respond, the specific timeline they would respond in, and the specific conditions under which that response would end. It was not a threat, it was a manual. The humans had written a manual for what they would do and put it in the treaty itself. Des found this stranger and more sobering than anything else that had happened. After the signing, Goru stood in the small common room adjacent to the meeting chamber. He had a cup of something warm that Odin's staff had provided. He was looking at nothing in particular when Odin came in and stood nearby. He said, "I have a question that is not part of any official record." She said, "Go ahead." He said, "At the point when we crossed the line, were your ships already in position?" She said no. They had activated and moved to position after the crossing. The preparations were in place, but the ships were at their home stations. He said, "How long did it take them to get into position without us detecting them?" She said 4 days. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We were inside your formation for 2 days before we knew you were there." She said, "Yes." He said, "You could have done anything you wanted in those 2 days." She said, "Yes." He looked at his cup. "Why didn't you?" Odin said, "Because we wanted withdrawal and a treaty, not a fight." She paused. "We told you that 4 times. Goru had no answer for that. He had none because she was right, and he had known she was right since the moment Des had read him the message count from Braille's first emergency report. He said quietly that he understood now. Odin said she was glad. She said it without sharpness. She was not enjoying this, not in the way that victory is sometimes enjoyed. She was simply a person who had spent 2 years trying to avoid an outcome that had happened anyway, and was now watching it resolve the only way it could have from the moment the warnings were ignored. In the weeks that followed, Voss submitted his operational report to Human Command. The report covered the full timeline of Quiet Push, from its original design 11 years ago to the final escort at the Kale line. It noted what had worked and what needed updating for future contingencies. The last section of the report was short. It said that the Varath had not acted out of malice. They had acted out of a miscalculation. They had studied humans the way many species did, selectively, looking for the edges of patience rather than the depth of preparation. Voss recommended that the full human conflict archive be made publicly accessible to all species in contact with human governments, not as a boast, as a service, so that the miscalculation would not need to happen again. The recommendation was approved. Warden logged the treaty, the operational file, and the archive release. Then it opened a new monitoring file for the Kale line region, set its alert parameters, and returned to its regular work. Everything was quiet. For now, everything was quiet.